Before we go anywhere today, I want you to hold one question in your head, because the entire story bends around it. What happens to a person who has every trophy the culture says should make her happy, and still needs the room to admit she's winning? Because that is the real story underneath all the noise right now. It is not about a relationship. It is not about who has a baby with whom. It is about the difference between being seen and being celebrated, and what it looks like when a public figure cannot tell the two apart. Over the past several months, Cardi B has been at the center of a rolling public conversation that touches on status, approval, and the strange math of fame. She has confirmed major personal news, she has responded to rumors that spread across social media, and she has said things in public that lit up comment sections everywhere. Some people watched those moments and saw confidence. Other people watched the exact same moments and saw something much more complicated. A person who appears to equate disagreement with disrespect, and who seems genuinely confused that not everyone wants the life she represents. Here is what we actually know, what has only been alleged, and what remains a matter of interpretation. By the end, I want you to tell me where you land, because this one genuinely splits the room. Let's start with the things that are not in dispute. Cardi B is one of the most commercially successful rappers of her generation. She has chart history, brand deals, a massive platform, and a career that turned a social media origin story into a legitimate empire. That part is not up for debate. Whatever anyone thinks of the music, the numbers are the numbers, and the longevity is real. In 2025, she and NFL wide receiver Stefon Diggs went public as a couple. By late 2025, she confirmed she was pregnant with her fourth child and her first with Diggs. Los Angeles Times reported the arrival of a baby boy, and the internet quickly gave the child a nickname, playing off Diggs's football career. That is the factual spine of the relationship. Two high-profile people, a public pregnancy, and a new baby. Nothing controversial there on its own. The controversy arrived from the edges, the way it almost always does in these stories. Diggs, according to multiple outlets, faced a wave of online allegations involving other women and other children. Page 6 reported in early 2026 that Cardi B had given Diggs a firm warning amid reports that he had fathered multiple children with multiple women in recent years. Other outlets, including Vibe, covered Cardi B responding to what was described as baby mama drama. And social media was full of claims, many of them unattributed, several of them clearly exaggerated, that some of the women connected to Diggs were upset, that there had been tension around the holidays, and that Cardi B had addressed it directly in live broadcasts. This is where the line between what happened and what people say happened starts to blur. And that blur is important, because most of the loudest takes you will see right now are built entirely on the blur. The moment that turned this from a standard celebrity gossip cycle into a full conversation about psychology and celebrity culture came when Cardi B went live. She spoke about envy. She spoke about success. And in the telling that spread everywhere, her argument was roughly this. Other women were not envious of her because of what she had built, but because of a man. Her framing appeared to be that people were directing jealousy at her for the wrong reason. That if anyone was going to envy her, it should be for her success, her money, and everything she had accomplished. Set aside for a second whether you believe that framing. Just notice what it reveals about the underlying premise. The premise is that some form of envy is expected. That being the target of jealousy is, in this worldview, not a problem to solve, but a proof of arrival. That recognition is owed, and that the absence of recognition is itself suspicious. That is the part worth sitting with, because it is bigger than Cardi B. It is a premise that a lot of modern celebrity culture quietly depends on. The idea that your value can be measured by how much other people want what you have, and that if they do not want it, something must be wrong with them. But here is the flaw in that logic, and it is a flaw we should be able to name without cruelty. Not everyone is playing the same game. Not everyone wants wealth in the form that celebrity wealth takes. A lot of people, arguably most people, want security, stability, a paid bill, a full fridge, and the freedom to move through life without performing for an audience. They do not want to trade their peace for visibility. So when a public figure interprets a lack of admiration as proof of envy, they may be misreading something simpler: indifference, or disagreement, or just a genuine difference in values. That is not a diagnosis. I am not a clinician, and I will not pretend to know what is going on inside anyone's mind. But the observable behavior, Going live to argue that people should envy you for the correct reason is a public statement, and public statements are fair to analyze. Now layer the Diggs situation on top of that. This is where the story gets genuinely messy, because there are two very different conversations happening at once, and they keep getting treated as one. The first conversation is about Cardi B herself. She has a new child, a relationship that is under intense public scrutiny, and a spotlight that never turns off. That is a hard position to be in regardless of how much money or fame is attached to it. The second conversation is about everyone else in the orbit. The women described in headlines and comment sections as Diggs's other children's mothers. Their situations, their motivations, and their private lives have mostly been narrated through screenshots, anonymous claims, and secondhand accounts. Very little of it is verified. A lot of it is almost certainly wrong in the details, even if some of the broad strokes are true. What is fair to say is this: when a public figure responds to rumors about other women, especially women who are not public figures in the same way, the response itself becomes part of the story. Celebrities have every right to defend themselves. But when the defense involves a live audience, a running camera, and a thesis about who is envious of whom, the optics shift. The person defending themselves can start to look like the person escalating, not because they are wrong to feel attacked, but because the platform they are using is designed to amplify conflict. And that, I think, is the honest middle ground here. You can have sympathy for the pressure and still think the execution made things worse. You can understand why someone would feel attacked and still think that they're just jealous. Reframe is a weak argument, because it flattens every critic into the same caricature. There is a thing that happens in celebrity coverage where the loudest version of a story is also the dumbest version, and the smartest version is too quiet to trend. Let me give you the smart version. Cardi B's recent public statements read, to a lot of observers, as a person defending her choices in real time. She has spent years being picked apart for her body, her relationships, her parenting, her accent, her parenting again, her marriages, her singles, and her silence. So when new scrutiny arrives, the instinct to swing back is not surprising. It is, in fact, one of the most human things about her. The problem is not that she defends herself. The problem is the frame she reaches for when she does. Everyone is just jealous is a frame that does two destructive things at once. First, it dismisses legitimate criticism without engaging it. Second, it prevents the person using it from ever asking whether any of the criticism might contain something worth hearing. It is a psychological one-way door. Once you decide that all opposition is envy, you never have to examine your own decisions again. That is comfortable. And comfort is exactly what makes it dangerous. On the other side, though, the public has a responsibility here too. There is a version of this conversation that has slipped from critique into cruelty. Calling someone miserable, mocking their appearance, gloating over their struggles. That is not analysis. That is just hostility wearing a narrator's jacket. And there is a lot of it going around right now, on both sides. If we are going to hold Cardi B accountable for how she talks about other women, we have to hold the audience accountable for how it talks about her. The standard has to go in both directions, or it is not a standard, it is a grudge. Let me pull the lens back, because this is where the story becomes genuinely useful rather than just entertaining. There is a difference between being admired and being watched, and our entire celebrity economy has collapsed that distinction. Being watched is passive. It requires nothing from you except that you be interesting enough on a screen. Being admired is active. It requires that people believe something about your character, your values, or your craft. You can be the most watched person on the internet and be deeply, quietly unadmired. You can also be widely admired and rarely talked about. A lot of extremely famous people have never been able to afford that distinction because their entire business model depends on collapsing it. The confusion between everyone is looking at me and everyone wants what I have is not a bug in that business model. It is the business model. And the danger is that the person inside the machine starts to believe the machine's math. So when we talk about someone going live to argue that others should envy her for the correct reason, we are really watching a person negotiate the terms of her own visibility in public. That negotiation is painful to watch not because it is rare, but because it is so common. Most people do the same thing in private. We just don't have a camera on our face when we do it. Now, let me be precise about what criticism holds up under scrutiny and what does not. The criticism that does not hold up, The stuff about appearance, the mockery, the suggestion that someone's plastic surgery is itself a moral failing, the idea that a woman's romantic history is proof of low character. None of that is serious. It is recreational cruelty, and it tells you more about the person posting it than about Cardi B. The criticism that does hold up, there is a legitimate question about the public example. When someone with an audience the size of Cardi B's frames every conflict as "they're jealous of me for a man," they are not just describing their own life. They are teaching a framework to the people watching. And the framework is corrosive. It teaches that other women are competitors. It teaches that disagreement is envy. It teaches that your worth is something other people are supposed to confirm. Those are not small things when the audience includes young people who are literally still forming their sense of how status works. That is the part worth discussing openly, without cruelty and without pretending it is not happening. You can respect the grind, acknowledge the pressure, and still say, the message embedded in that live broadcast was a step backward for the very people who have supported her rise. So here is where I land, and then I want your take, because this one is genuinely split. On the facts, Cardi B and Stefon Diggs have a new child. The relationship is public, and the surrounding drama is largely built on a mixture of verified basics and unverified amplification. The warning to Diggs, the baby mama tensions, the holiday confrontation that some pages described. Much of it is alleged, reported by outlets, but not confirmed in the details, and colored heavily by accounts whose motives we have no way to check. On the psychology, I will go as far as observation allows. The public statements suggest someone who is defending her choices under enormous pressure and who has reached for the most available shield in modern celebrity culture, the accusation of envy. That shield works as a feeling. It does not work as an argument. And the more someone relies on it, the more telling it becomes. On the bigger picture, what we are watching is not really about one relationship. It is a case study in what the attention economy does to a person's understanding of value. When your income, your relevance, and your sense of self are all tied to being seen, the line between being attacked and simply not being celebrated dissolves. And when that line dissolves, the person on the other side of the camera starts to look less like a winner and more like someone trapped, not by her critics, but by a definition of winning that requires everyone else to agree it is winning. That is the tragedy hiding inside the clicks. And it is a tragedy that deserves better than mockery. So now the question is yours, because I promised you one at the top of this. When a public figure says the criticism is just envy, do you read that as confidence? Or do you read it as the first sign that the criticism might have landed closer to home? Where do you actually stand? Not on Cardi B, but on the bigger idea that recognition is something a person is owed for succeeding. Drop it in the comments. I read them, and I want to know whether the room really splits the way I think it does. And if there is one person you thought of while watching this, someone in your own feed who treats every disagreement like jealousy, this is the video to send them. Share it. Let's see if they can spend 5 minutes on the other side of the frame. As for what happens next with Cardi B and Diggs, the story is far from over. And I have a feeling the next chapter is going to test exactly the distinction we just talked about, whether she gets celebrated for what she builds or just watch for what she can't stop saying. Until the next one, I want you to keep your eyes open and your standard high for them, and honestly, for yourself too.